Hello, beautiful. Welcome to another reading of Captain Frederick Marryat's diary on this very cold and rainy spring day. It's so chilly for spring. I think it's only like 45 degrees out, and it's been raining for a couple days straight, and that's very unusual for the area I live in because I live in the high desert. We usually only get rain every once in a while. So while it's been a very nice treat, I am definitely enjoying snuggling up in bed with you and reading some more of Captain Frederick Marryat's diary. I think the only thing that would make it better is maybe a nice fire in the fireplace. But this spring, I had a bird make a nest in my chimney. I'm sure you've heard some of the tweeting in my most recent videos. And that is my finches. They had babies this spring, so their babies are tweeting to the babies that are in the chimney. So I will have to forego the fire during this chilly rain. Anywho, that's enough chit-chat. Let's jump in and see what the good captain is up to. Once more, flying up the noble Hudson. After you have passed West Point, the highlands through which the river has forced its passage gradually diminish. And as the shore becomes level, so does the country become more fertile. We pass the manor of Albany, as it is called, being a Dutch grant of land, now in the possession of one person, a Mr. Van Rensselaer, and equal to many a German principality, being 20 miles by 48 miles square. Mr. Van Rensselaer still retains the old title of patroon. It is generally supposed in England that, in America, all property must be divided between the children at the decease of the parent. This is not the case. The entailing of estates was abolished by an act of Congress in 1788. But a man may will away his property entirely to his eldest son if he pleases. This is, however, seldom done. Public opinion is too strong against it, and the Americans fear public opinion beyond the grave. Indeed, were a man so to act, the other claimants would probably appeal to have the will set aside upon the grounds of lunacy, and the sympathy of an American jury would decree in their favor. As you ascend to Albany City, the banks of the river are very fertile and beautiful, and the river is spotted with many very picturesque little islands. The country seats, which fringe the whole line of the shore, are all built in the same and very bad style. Every house or tenement, be it a palace or a cottage, has its porticos and pillars, a string of petty Parthenons which tire you by their uniformity and pretense. I had intended to stop at Hudson, that I might proceed from thence to New Lebanon to visit the shaking Quakers. But as I discovered that there was a community of them not 5 miles from Troy, I, to avoid a fatiguing journey, left Albany and continued on to that city. It is the capital of the state of New York, with a population of nearly 30,000. Its commerce is very extensive, as it is here that the Erie Canal communications with the far west, as well as the eastern states, debouch into the Hudson. We have here a singular proof not only of the rapidity with which cities rise in America, but also how superior energy will overcome every disadvantage. Little more than 20 years ago, Albany stood by itself, a large and populous city without a rival. But its population was chiefly Dutch. The Yankees from the eastern states came down and settled themselves at Troy, not 5 miles distant in opposition to them. It would be supposed that Albany could have crushed this city in its birth, but it could not, and Troy is now a beautiful city, with its mayor, its corporation, and a population of 20,000 souls, and divides the commerce with Albany, from which most of the eastern trade has been ravished. The inhabitants of Albany are termed Albanians, those of Troy, Trojans. In one feature, these cities are very similar, being both crowded with lumber and pretty girls. I went out to see the Shakers at Niskayuna. So much has already been said about their tenants that I shall not repeat them, further than to observe that all their goods are in common, and that, although the sexes mix together, they profess the vows of celibacy and chastity. Their lands are in excellent order, and they are said to be very rich. I should be very sorry to take away the character of any community, but as I was a little skeptical as to the possibility of the vow of chastity being observed under circumstances above alluded to, I made some inquiries, and having met with one who had succeeded from the fraternity, I discovered that my opinion of human nature was correct, and the conduct of the Shakers is not altogether so. I must not enter into any details, as they would be unfit for publication. We were admitted into a long room on the ground floors where the Shakers were seated on forms, the men opposite the women, and apart from each other. The men were in their waistcoats and shirt sleeves, twiddling their thumbs, and looking awfully puritanical. The women were attired in dresses of very light striped cotton, which hung about them like full dressing gowns, and concealed all shape and proportions. A plain mob cap on their heads, and a thick muslin handkerchief in many folds over their shoulders, completed their attire. They each held in their hands a pocket handkerchief as large as a towel, and of almost the same substance. But the appearance of the women was melancholy and unnatural. I say unnatural because it required to be accounted for. They had all the advantages of exercise and labor in the open air, good food, and good clothing. They were not overworked, for they are not required to work more than they please. And yet there was something so pallid, so unearthly, in their complexions that it gave you the idea that they had been taken up from their coffins a few hours after their decease. Not a hue of health, not a vestige of color in any cheek or lip. One cadaverous yellow tinge prevailed. And yet there were to be seen many faces very beautiful, as far as regarded outline, but they were the features of the beautiful in death. The men, on the contrary, were ruddy, strong, and vigorous. Why, then, this difference between the sexes, where they each performed the same duties, where none were taxed beyond their strength, and all were well fed and clothed? After a silence of 10 minutes, one of the men of the community, evidently a coarse, illiterate person, rose and addressed a few words to the spectators, requesting them not to laugh at what they saw, but to behave themselves properly, etc. And then he sat down. One of the leaders then burst out into a hymn to a jigging sort of tune, and all the others joined chorus. After the hymn was sung, they all rose, put away the forms on which they had been seated, and stood in line, 8 in a row, men and women separate, facing each other, about 10 feet apart, the ranks of men being flanked by the boys, and those of the women by the girls. They commenced their dancing by advancing in rows, just about as profane people do in Let when they dance quadrilles, and then retreated the same distance, all keeping regular time. And turning back to back after every third advance. The movement was rather quick, and they danced to their own singing of the following beautiful composition. La la di la del la, la la di la di la del la del la. I'm not a singer. Keeping time also with the hands as well as feet, the former raised up to the chest, and hanging down like the forepaws of a dancing bear. After a quarter of an hour they sat down again, and the women made use of their large towel pocket handkerchiefs to wipe off the perspiration. Another hymn was sung, and then the same person addressed the spectators, requesting them not to laugh, and inquiring if any of them felt a wish to be saved, adding, "Not one of you, I don't think." He looked round at all of us with the most ineffable content, and then sat down, and they sang another hymn, the burden of which was, "Our souls are saved, and we are free from vice and all iniquity," which was a very comfortable delusion at all events. They then rose again, put away the forms as before, and danced another fashion. Instead of Let, it was Grand Ronde. About 10 men and women stood in 2 lines in the center of the room, as a vocal band of music, while all the others, 2 and 2, women first and men following, promenaded round with a short, quick step to the tune chanted in the century. As they went round and round, shaking their paws up and down before them, the scene was very absurd, and I could have laughed had I not felt disgusted at such a degradation of rational and immortal beings. This dance lasted a long while, until the music turned to croaking, and the perspiration was abundant. They stopped at last, and then announced that their exercise was finished. I waited a little while after the main body had dispersed to speak with one of the elders. "I will be with you directly," replied he, walking hastily away. But he never came back. I never heard the principle upon which they dance. David danced before the ark, but it is to be presumed that David danced as well as he sung. At least he thought so, for when his wife, Michal, laughed at him, he made her conduct a ground of divorce. Every community which works in common and is provided for in the mass must be rich, especially when it has no children to maintain. It is like receiving a person's labor in exchange for victuals and clothing only. And this is all I can perceive that can be said in favor of these people. Suffice it to say, I had a very bad opinion of them, and were I disposed to dilate on the subject, I should feel no inclination to treat them with the lenity shown to them by other travelers. From this mockery, I went to see what had a real tendency to make you feel religious. The Falls of the Mohawk, about 3 miles from Troy. Picturesque and beautiful as all falling water is, to describe it is extremely difficult, unless indeed by a forced simile. The flow of language is too tame for the flow of water, but if the reader can imagine a ledge of black rocks about 60 or 70 feet high, and that over this ledge was poured simultaneously the milk of some millions of cows, he will then have some idea of the beauty of the creaming falls of the Mohawk, embedded as they were in their wild and luxuriant scenery. Close to the falls, I perceived a few small wooden shielings appearing under the majestic trees which overshadowed them, more like dog kennels than the habitations of men. They were tenanted by Irish immigrants who had taken work at the new locks forming on the Erie Canal. I went up to them. In a tenement about 14 feet by 10 lived an Irishman, his wife and family, and 7 boys, as he called them. Young men from 20 to 30 years of age who boarded with him. There was but one bed on which slept the man, his wife, and family. Above the bed were some planks extending halfway the length of the shieling. And there slept the 7 boys, without any mattress or even straw to lie upon. I entered into conversation with them. They complained bitterly of the times, saying that their pay was not 2 shillings 6 pence of our money per day, and that they could not live upon it. This was true, but the distress had been communicated to all parts, and they were fortunate in finding work at all, as most of the public works had been discontinued. I mentioned to them that the price of labor in Ohio, Illinois, and the West was said to be $2 a day, and asked them why they did not go there. They replied that such were the price quoted to induce people to go, but that they never could find it when they arrived. That the clearing of new lands was attended with ague and fever, and that if once down with these diseases, there was no one to help them to rise again. I looked for the pig, and there he was, sure enough, under the bed.